Hey everyone, Forex here. In this video we are going to talk about a special construct in SQF, a while do structure. It's a very handy statement or piece of code that can often find its use in a script for a number of reasons. The primary function of while do is to repeat a selected code over and over several times, which is usually called looping the code or making loops. Now there are two different cases that can happen, 2 points of view that you can use to look at the code you work with. The first case is looping the code a set amount of times. For example, I want to simulate bleeding or poisoning and need to add 5 points of damage to player's health 10 times, dealing a total of half the player's health over time. A very common thing in other games, and for Arma we can easily script this effect with using for construct 10 times. I will cover the for looping some other time. Today we are going to talk about the second case, repeating code an undefined amount of times. This is the main topic of this video. I'll give you an example. The bleeding effect for AI units is more deadly and cripples the unit much more, dealing damage until the unit is left with 10 health points. We can't say ahead how many times the damage needs to be dealt. It has to repeat until the unit has 10% health left. One soldier can be at full health, another one almost dead, but our scripted poisoning effect needs to bring them both to the same level of health. And if someone is already below 10%, the script needs to have no effect at all. For these cases, we can use while do structure. It works pretty much as you can expect just from the words themselves. While something is true, do something over and over. The structure syntax is also very simple. While curly brackets condition do curly brackets code itself. The condition is a command or series of commands that in the end return a boolean value, either true or false, and the code block is a section that can contain pretty much any code you want. It is not limited by space, doesn't have character limits or anything, so you can use pretty much any code you want here. The engine goes first through the condition and decides whether it has a true or false value. If the condition is true, the game jumps into the do block and starts executing the commands contained inside. Once it reaches the end of the block, it returns back to the condition and asks again. If the condition is still true, it goes through the commands once more and continues to do so until the condition is evaluated as false. Once that happens, the block in the do section is skipped altogether. So technically, if the condition is false in the first moment of reading the code, the do section isn't executed at all. In all other cases, it is executed until the condition turns to false. Please remember though, that once the game goes through the individual commands inside the do section, it isn't checking the state of the condition. It only checks the condition at the very start, where it reaches the while do for the first time, and then each time it reaches the end of the do block. The while do looping can be used in many cases and situations. If you know you want to repeat the same code over and over, and you aren't sure how many times it's needed, you should consider using this structure in situations where exact count of repetitions isn't as important as the situation or moment in the mission. There are some risks associated with the use of this structure, however, and I strongly recommend you to bear them in mind every time you decide to use while do structure. The effects of this structure being used badly in a script can range anywhere from small imperfections in timing and little details to unplayable missions or a game crash. I will try to cover most of the common problems encountered, and if I forget about something important, I'm sure it will appear in the comments sooner or later. Okay, so the biggest problem that can happen while you are editing is a game crash. If you aren't used to saving every 20 seconds or so, a crash takes away a chunk of your work, some of your time and patience, and it's not always clear what exactly caused it. So you might go through a number of crashes in a row, and that's something we all want to avoid, as it's highly discouraging and energy consuming. A wrong while do loop can cause some of the nastiest crashes. The game can, in some cases, significantly lag your whole computer and usually doesn't display any error message afterwards. leaving you clueless as to what caused the problem. The problem is a loop without a pause. Now let's go back and remember how I described the engine reading the while do. First, a condition is evaluated, then code is executed, and this repeats until the condition is false. Now let's imagine I want to display the player's position on the screen so that I know the coordinates. So I will write while a live player do hint, and I will display the player's position with a hint command. This surely will work. The code gets looped over and over, always providing me with the actual position. Well, yes, that is true, but without any other commands, the game is trying to loop only two commands: the condition and the hint. As these both take 0.00 something seconds to evaluate and process, the loop finishes in an extremely short amount of time, repeats itself, and again completes itself almost immediately. This leads to loud, repeated sounds of the hint being displayed, and after several seconds, massive lag as the game tries to handle all rendering and simulation at the same time as executing this command over and over and over. Eventually, the game can stop responding completely, and you have to exit out of it through the task manager. This problem has a very simple fix though. Just add a pause to the loop, and give the game some time to handle all other processes. Even if you add a pause of 10 milliseconds, which is barely noticeable anyway, it's enough time to cause next to no problems. Of course, always consider if the loop is really needed and if you can't make the pause longer. Time and processing power are only limited resources, and you don't want to spend them on something you don't even need. These endless instant loops usually don't have any use and can only cause problems. While the game may not instantly crash with your combination of commands, it's still wasteful use of the processing power, and at least a minimal pause should be added to every loop you actually want to use for an extended period of time. I recommend you to use the command sleep for the pause and try to remember this. It has happened to me several times, it's never good, and I lost a few hours of work just because I wanted to test out some things and wrote the statement without a pause. A small note for the more advanced scripters and coders: as you know, the non-scheduled environment doesn't allow the sleep command, but also the while loop there is limited to 10,000 iterations only, after which it just ends, so bear that in mind. Another problem that may happen is placing the sleep command in a place that doesn't really suit the code all that well. This is not a massive problem, it won't cause any catastrophe in the game, but in some situations it can result in a wrong timing of certain events. Imagine this example. My mission is to find and kill an officer who is hiding from me and keeps running away. Each minute I get a short message from my colleagues telling me the coordinates of my target so I can find him more easily. So I'll start writing the code, so probably important commands first. So I'll write while do structure, the command itself. The condition is probably a live target officer or something, so when he dies, the messages stop. Now I remember the video from Forex about loops and how important it is to have a sleep command somewhere in there, so alright, I'll set it to 1 minute, that's 60 seconds, so I will write sleep 60. Believe it or not, there's a massive difference between putting the command at the top of the block and at the bottom. If I put it at the top, it means that the game will check whether the target is alive, then wait 1 minute and display a message. That sounds alright, but what if I kill my target in those 60 seconds? The game checks if he's alive, and he is at that time. A few seconds later I kill him with a good shot, and after a minute the game has to display a message. Now what does it tell me? The coordinates of a dead body? Or does it display an error? Either way, it won't behave as we would expect. We need to make sure the messages stop displaying as soon as the officer dies. So, alright, do I need to bring down the sleep interval to 1 second? Or even less? Or do I add an if statement to check again for my target? No, of course not. I just need to move the sleep command at the bottom of the block. That way, the game checks for the condition, displays my message, and then waits 60 seconds. After that time, it checks the condition again, and immediately displays another message, or leaves the whole loop. That way there is no delay between the condition check and the result that we need. At the same time, we still got the same time interval as before, didn't add any extra work for the game, and we don't even need any extra commands. So that's another tip for you. Try to think about how you need the information to be processed and write the code accordingly to what needs to happen in the mission. As I said before, it's entirely up to you to decide what to do with the space in the do block. You can write any code in there. However, you should always try to avoid combinations of commands that make no sense, like double checking for conditions. A short example: if you have a while loop and inside it you have a wait until command that waits for the same condition to change. So effectively the whole loop is pointless, since you will be waiting for the condition in wait until, and once that is done, the loop will reach the end and then exit. I know it may sound a bit absurd right now, but situations like this can happen. And yes, it's not a huge problem, it won't cause any errors or problems in a mission at all, but it makes it more difficult for others to read and understand your code, and it's a bit pointless to write such structures. You know, the code is good, but it could be better. And there are many situations where a while loop can be replaced with something less resource heavy or more logical. Looping with while do structure can sometimes be very demanding on your computer, especially with complicated commands looping in short time. A while do is one of the most resource heavy loop commands, and in many cases is the only one we can use. However, and I will now return back to the first part of the tutorial, in cases where we know the amount of iterations needed, we are much better off with a different code. Creating a counting mechanism with while do is very simple. Just make a variable equal to 0 and then keep adding 1 in a loop, and you have yourself a simple clock that counts the number of iterations within the do block. That can be used to measure and limit the loop. For example, we can add a condition that our inner clock needs to be less than 1000. That way we make sure that the maximum number of iterations for our loop will always be 1000, after which the loop ends. Sounds like a good plan, but in this case we are already working with a set number of iterations, and we can replace the while loop with, for example, a for loop, which I will talk about in detail in one of the future videos. With more complicated calculations and commands in the loop, we can compare the two and see that the for loop is in this case faster and it does the same job. Of course, this doesn't apply to all situations, and I don't think that you should be concerned about this when you are creating some small scripts, but you never know. The do section of the command counts as another scope, so all local variables created here are only valid for this current scope. You can also use exit with to jump out of a loop at any moment, but again, it's good to avoid using exit with too much and just exit the loop naturally by breaking the condition. There may be situations where you need an endless loop. For whatever reason, you just need to repeat the code no matter what. In this case, it's best to use constants for the condition so that the check is always the same value. The closest one to use is true, the Boolean value itself. In computer logic, if you ask for a value of true, that's always true. A different answer would be a paradox. So if you make a loop with true in condition, you can be sure that this loop will never exit. The condition will never turn to false, never, ever. Same thing with statements like 1 is greater than 0 and similar calculations. In single player, it's pretty safe to use a live player as well, since killing the player usually means the end of the mission. You could as well ask if the player is lower than 9 million meters above the ground, and that will most probably be true as well, but these conditions A make no sense, and B cost a little tiny bit of extra calculation for the computer, and while that will not affect the mission itself, it's just not desired. Alright, I have one more example for you to show you one more situation where you can use the while do statement, and as always, all examples from the video are on pasted.co and the link to them is in the video description. You can use them for anything you wish. Okay, we'll be making a simple zombie script. It's not going to be very spectacular, just a short example, some 20 lines or so. but good enough to practice some coding. To make the situation simple, I'm assuming that the player's unit is the only survivor in the quarantine zone and the zombies have no better target than him. We'll start very simple, we'll have one zombie and we'll have him march towards the player when he's alive. So the code will be very simple. While the player's unit is alive, the zombie will periodically receive a command to move to his position. Pretty simple, do not forget the sleep command there. Alright, this will not do. We need to add a bit more to the code. How about this? The zombie only moves towards the player if they are 100 meters or less apart. Zombies have poor eyesight and usually can't track people for long distances, so we shouldn't have this telepathic superhero zombie that just always knows where to go. We will add another command to the condition part of the structure. Player distance zombie is less than 100. Now I'm fairly convinced I already talked about having multiple conditions together. If you are here for the first time or missed the previous video, conditions are connected with words and or. In our case, we want both cases to be true. Player needs to be alive and less than 100 meters from the zombie, so we will use and. This is a bit better, but now we have the problem that the zombie has no other state than chasing the player. If the player is further than 100 meters away, this entire code is skipped and the zombie doesn't do anything. Now it's a good time to stop and think about the structure of our code. If we need to differentiate between a chasing state and a peaceful state, we may need to rewrite our loop conditions and format the entire script a bit better. And we will change the script a bit by adding another while do structure into the do block of the first loop. Remember that you can place any code here, even another loop, which will be executed as a part of this first loop. Now the bigger loop that we have here will serve us to check for living and dead units, and the smaller loop inside will take care of the zombie chasing the player process. By dividing the two, we have made sure that zombies are still controlled by the script when they are alive, but not chasing the player. That allows us to add more commands, control their behavior better, and also gives us more freedom for the chasing phase of their life, allowing us to further specify what they need to do. It also allows us to set different timings for the two actions. In the relaxed state, the zombie's instructions are only updated every 5 seconds, while in chase, they are updated every 3 seconds, and that number could be reduced a bit more for more precise attacks. Alright, so this is where the individual preferences begin. At this point we can add many different features, continue to expand and further structure the script, add more features, connect more scripts with specific functionalities, and make this into a proper zombie system. I'm fairly happy with what I have here. For the purpose of the video it's enough. I just added a couple of extra commands for the zombie to occasionally move around, and some notifications for the player so that we know the script actually works. Currently the zombie waits around until the player gets close, then starts chasing him and tries to get as close as possible. Once the player gets further away than 100 meters, the zombie stops and returns to his usual duty, staying mostly at one place and occasionally move around. I don't recommend you to use this exact script for an actual mission, since it's, well, not very suited for a large amount of units. It can take a few zombies but not all that many, and it doesn't really care about them attacking the player or anything. It's really basic, but again, shows you how the while do can work, what these structures can do in a script, so hopefully this video helped you with your efforts in mission making. If you are interested in some other coding videos and structures, you can check out some other videos, conditions and if-then structure. I also talked about for each looping structure some time ago, or just variables and coding basics in general. That's it for this video. I hope to see you all in the next one. Comment, like and share, and have a great day.